So I'm a pretty chill guy, you know? I love nature, love to go hiking, fishing, you name it. Camping is my favorite thing to do. This one time, I decided I needed a break from all the studying and my part-time job. So I packed up my gear and headed out to a secluded spot in the woods I found online. It was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful place, perfect for getting away from everything. The spot was exactly what I was looking for. It was a really nice, quiet little clearing, tucked away in the middle of a thick forest with a stream running through it. I set up my tent, started a fire, and made myself comfortable. I figured I'd spend the next few days just relaxing, maybe reading a book, enjoying the quiet. On the first night, I went to sleep early. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of branches snapping. It was pretty creepy, especially since I was all alone. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside to check things out, but I didn't see anything. Just a bunch of shadows in the moonlight. I told myself it was probably just a deer or something and went back to bed. The next day, I spent exploring the woods around my campsite. I found a small, abandoned cabin a few hours down the trail. It was pretty run down, but it was clear that someone had been living there recently. I found an old coffee mug left on a table, a half-eaten bowl of cereal, and some clothes thrown on the floor. It seemed a bit eerie, but I figured it was probably just someone who'd been passing through. I decided to look around the cabin a little more. In the back room, I found an old wooden box in the corner. I picked it up and gave it a good shake, and I could hear something inside. I opened it up, and there was a leather-bound journal inside. I was curious, so I sat down and started reading. The journal was filled with handwritten entries about this woman's life, but the stuff near the end was really messed up. It was all about this group she was a part of. The journal was rambling as heck, basically about a cult. She was talking about rituals, sacrifices, and stuff like that. It was almost too crazy to believe. I flipped through the pages. It was getting pretty disturbing. She said she wanted to escape the group, but they kept her isolated and under constant watch. She made it sound like they were keeping the members there by force. The entries got more and more desperate and even talked about escaping through the woods. Then I saw something that gave me chills. She'd written about a creepy dude, a really skinny guy with dirty blonde hair, who she said was always lurking around the place. She called him the Watcher. I thought it was just her being paranoid. The more I read, the more I convinced myself it was just some dude's messed up fantasy. Still, it was getting late when I finished reading the journal. The sun was setting, and I got a weird feeling about the place. I decided to leave the journal there and head back to my campsite, thinking it was just my imagination that was getting to me. Just as I was about to reach my campsite, I saw a figure standing under a tree. It was the skinny dude from the journal, the Watcher. He was tall and lean with messy blonde hair, and he had this creepy, unsettling smirk on his face. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My own flashlight was in the tent, and I didn't want to make any sudden moves. I tried to think of a way to get away from him quickly, but I didn't have any time to think things through. I didn't want to make eye contact, so I tried to slip past him, but he moved and cut me off, blocking my way. I took a step back, trying to avoid him at all costs. He just stood there, silently staring at me. The look in his eyes was empty and just made me feel uneasy. He didn't say anything, he just kept staring at me. I didn't know what to do. I had to get out of there. I knew if I stayed there with the watcher, I knew it wouldn't end well. He moved again, slowly closing in on me. He was getting closer and closer. I had to get out of there, so I ran fast. He just watched me, still silent, smiling that same creepy smile. I ran as fast as I could, back towards my campsite, back to my tent. The only thing on my mind was to get away from that place, away from that dude. I took off running as fast as my legs could carry me, going back to the campsite, back to my tent. It was hard to see in the darkness. When I finally got back to my tent, I just kept running, didn't even bother checking for my bag, didn't even bother with the flashlight. I just ran as fast as I could. I ran all night, and I didn't stop until I was far, far away from that cabin, far, far away from those woods. I went home that same day, got back to the city, and went straight to bed, totally exhausted. I was more scared than I'd ever been in my life. I knew I'd never be the same after that night. I got a new job, left the city, and moved to a different state. And it's been years since then, but I still think about that journal, about the cabin, about that creepy watcher in the woods. I sometimes wonder about the poor woman who wrote those entries. I hope she made it out. I hope she's okay. I know I was lucky to get out. It was a Tuesday, a pretty normal Tuesday. I was stressed about my exams and just needed to get away for a bit. My best friend, Tom, used to come camping with me all the time, but he had a new girlfriend and was pretty much tied to her hip, so I decided to go solo. I packed my stuff and drove up to the woods that were just a few hours away, the usual routine. I picked a spot by a lake, the usual spot we always went to. I set up my tent and lit a fire, the usual camping stuff. It was pretty quiet. You could only hear the birds and the wind gently rustling the leaves. Then I noticed it. It was just a single footprint in the soft dirt. It wasn't mine. I'm telling you, there was no way it was mine. I was the only one there. I didn't think much of it. You're always going to get a few footprints in the woods, but it's not like someone was running around. I shrugged it off, but that single footprint kept coming back to me. It was just so odd. I stayed up late that night, just drinking coffee and looking at the stars. I felt like someone was watching me, but when I looked around, there was nothing. I kept thinking about that footprint. It was like something was out there, something that I couldn't see. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. The air seemed thicker, almost suffocating. I decided to pack up and leave. As I was taking down my tent, I saw it again. Another footprint right next to the first one. And this one was fresh. I started getting really weird and uneasy. I packed up quickly and got into the car. I was just about to drive off when I saw something in my rearview mirror. It was just a figure standing at the edge of the woods. I couldn't see the face, the figure was standing too far back, but it was skinny and tall with long dark hair kind of falling over its face. It was standing in the same spot where I'd seen the footprints. I got out of the car and was about to confront it, but it just stood there, watching me. It was just staring at me. There wasn't any movement, no malice, just a very still stare. It was like it was waiting, expecting something. I didn't know what to do, but I started feeling really uncomfortable, so I got back into my car and drove off. I looked in the mirror a few more times, but the figure was gone. From that day on, I've avoided camping alone. I mean, I still go, but I always make sure I'm with other people, and I never camp in that spot again, no way. I think to this day that the figure was just waiting for a chance to get me. I don't know, maybe it was some kind of stalker or a crazy dude, but it wasn't a coincidence. I'm not sure why I'm sharing this, but I'm a little bit rattled. I still think about those footprints. Sometimes it just gets to me. I don't know if that figure was waiting for me to come back. I don't know if it's still out there, but I do know that I never want to go back to that place again. I think about the figure a lot. I can still see the shape in my mind. I always feel a little bit uneasy. I'm not sure if they're still out there. I mean, I'm just a normal guy, right? This was just a really bad camping trip. I don't think it's going to happen again, but I think about it every time I'm in the woods. A couple of months later, I went to the local police station. I told them about what happened. I'm not sure if they believed me or not, but they did promise to check the area. I've been back in the woods a few times after that, but never by myself. I never stay alone in the dark after that camping trip. Even with people around, I make sure I keep my distance just in case. I'm not sure if it affected me for better or for worse. I mean, it made me a little bit more cautious, that's for sure. It made me more aware of my surroundings, which is probably a good thing, but it also made me a little bit more afraid of the woods. I still sometimes think about the figure, and I keep asking myself why it was there. I keep asking myself why it was watching me. But I guess, like I said, this was just a really bad camping trip, right? I was planning to go camping for a long time. It had been ages since I had gone camping alone in the woods. I thought it would be a good way to get away from it all, relax, and clear my head. I packed up my gear, got in my car, and drove out to the mountains. I found a nice spot to pitch my tent, set up my camp, and started to cook dinner over a campfire. I was hungry, so I decided to make a simple pasta. I felt pretty content. I was feeling relaxed. The mountains were silent and pretty. In the distance, I could hear the faint sounds of a waterfall. The weather was a bit strange. It was getting very dark very quickly, but the weather was also really warm. It was almost like a warm summer evening. This was a bit weird because it was late September and the weather should have been colder. I could tell that I was in for a long and uncomfortable night. But again, I felt pretty relaxed. I was really tired after driving for hours and I started to doze off. I suddenly woke up. It was almost like I had been jolted awake. I noticed something really weird. The weather had changed dramatically. I could clearly feel the temperature dropping and a sudden chilly wind swept over me. It felt like a gust of fresh mountain air, but actually it was weird because I could tell that the wind was coming from a different direction. I checked my watch and it was only 9:30 p.m. It was still early. I sat up in my tent and tried to figure out what was happening. I couldn't see much in the dark, but I could see a figure standing in the tree line. It was dark, so I couldn't make out many details. I could only make out the silhouette. I watched it for a moment, hoping it would move and reveal itself. I was not really scared at that point. I was just curious. I thought maybe it was someone that was lost or something. I thought I should probably go out there and check on the person. I slipped out of my tent and started to walk towards the figure. I had to walk through the darkness, but since the silhouette was dark too, I actually had a better view of the person. It was too late, the figure was gone. I thought it must have moved to a different spot. I walked for a few more steps. Then I suddenly felt something was off. I stopped and looked around. I couldn't see anything. I decided to call out. I was ready to offer help. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called. I wasn't getting any response. I decided to leave it at that. So I started walking back to my campsite. It was very dark and I was getting concerned. When I was back at my tent, I stopped to light up the lantern so I could see where I was going. I felt something touch my shoulder. I was so startled, I almost yelled out loud. I turned around, but I couldn't see anyone. I swore I felt something grab my shoulder. I was afraid to check because there was not a soul around. But when I turned around again, I saw the figure from the tree-line. It was standing right behind me. It was holding a rusty knife. Oh my gosh. I swear, I thought, what in the world is happening? This guy is going to kill me. After a few seconds, I reacted. I ran. The guy didn't try to chase me. I could hear him chuckling in the distance. I couldn't believe what was going on. I ran as fast as I could. I made it to my car. I opened the door and jumped inside. I locked the doors and started the engine. But I realized the guy was still standing there. He wasn't going to give up. He was smiling at me right behind my car. I did not know what to do. I was stuck. I started to drive slowly in reverse. I was worried that if I drove too quickly, I could hit him, but I also didn't want to be there waiting for him to attack me. I reversed as smoothly as I could, and when I got to a safe distance, I made a fast U-turn and started to drive away. I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. For a moment, I started thinking of how to get someone's attention. I had a cell phone, but in that moment, I didn't trust it. I was so scared that I didn't even try. I was afraid that if I tried to call someone, the guy would come running at my car. I drove away. I went down the mountain, past the small town at the bottom of the mountain, until night got later. I drove through the night and ended up stopping at a truck stop a few hours away. I spent the night there, and the next morning I drove back to my house. The next day, I went back to the spot where I was camping. I saw no one. The tent was still there, but nothing was missing. I searched the entire forest, even the spot where I saw the figure from the tree-line, but I found nothing. Just a regular, normal forest. I reported the incident to the authorities. They were skeptical, but they took notes. The police officer who took down my report told me he was going to check in the area, and if I could give him more details, I could call them at the station. From that day forward, I never went camping again. I know many people are probably going to say I was crazy, and that the guy was probably just some crazy person from the nearby town who was going to get a little scare. I thought of that too. But I didn't know. There were so many things that felt wrong that day that it made me doubt if it was really just an encounter with a random guy. The police officer told me that if I had any other information, I could call them. They took my number. 3 days later, the police called me. They told me that another incident very similar to mine took place at the same spot where I was camping. Someone else reported that they saw a guy in the tree line that was chasing them with a knife. The officer told me that they took down all my information, they compared notes, and they said that it was very likely that I encountered the same guy. The officer suggested I got to their station to take a look at some recent mugshots of local individuals that had been arrested for offenses that could potentially be related. He said that this mysterious guy was also being investigated for similar incidents in the area, but he told me that they were not able to find any other information about him. They could not find a match with any of their suspects. He admitted they were clueless about the guy. I never went back to that spot for camping. I was driving past a truck stop a few months later, and I saw a guy that looked exactly like the one in the woods, standing in the shadows. I saw him for a second, and I decided to drive away as fast as I could. I never looked back. I don't know what happened to him, but I believe he was still out there. I'm glad I'm still alive. I did not tell this story to anyone else for a long time, but I guess someone needs to tell it. The guy is still out there. I can't believe this is happening. I don't know what to do.